Great by Choice by Jim Collins. So I just finished reading this book, and it's kind of similar to Good to Great. I've never read the book, but it seems like it's sort of the same idea. Basically, they take a bunch of different companies and compare them to the less successful or more successful version. And the pairing that stuck out to me was USSC and Stryker. So I think what they do is some sort of surgical device manufacturing, something healthcare related. But basically, Stryker decided that they would grow by 25-ish% per year. So like 20 to 25% every year consistently. That was their goal. USSC is a company that's around the same age, and the only difference with them is that they decided that they're going to grow as fast as possible. So he talks about how Stryker grew about 20 to 25% a year, every year for 19 years. And then he talks about USSC and how they grew an average of 45% per year, some years a little higher, some years a little lower. Now, you would think to invest in USSC because they average 45% gains per year. But the thing is, the compounding interest on that doesn't really add up the way it does with the more consistent 25%. So you might be way up one year and then you go down and you're not really building on the interest that you've created because you're losing it and gaining it back all the time, rather than a steady curve, which ends up going sort of like that. So that's a much better way to go. It's interesting, I just was reading this while sort of investing in stocks, so that's kind of what I was going for without knowing this, and he really talks about like how important it is. He talks about how Stryker went up about 315 times its original value in those 19 years. And USSC, in comparison, did not even make the same amount as the average in the market. They were below average versus 315 times what they started with. So consistent growth, he talks about that being a 20-mile march. And Stryker, companies like that, would call that like the law, where the law is to go up 20% per year. 20-mile march, you're going the same amount every day. He talks about how if you have to march from California to Maine, you should go 20 miles per day rather than 80 miles the first day somehow if you're like super excited and you just don't sleep, and then you're tired and it's too hot the next day and you don't do anything, and that kind of like kills your momentum. And then at the same time, just all different things could happen. You can't really predict what's going to happen, but if you say 20-mile march and it's the first day you're excited, but you stop at 20 miles because that was your plan, and then the next day, super hot, go 20 miles anyway, and eventually, through consistency, you are much better off. And that's an example without the added compounding interest that we talked about with stocks. So that's like the number one thing that I learned from this book. The next thing is they say to always be firing shots, basically trying out these new avenues for your business and kind of innovating, but not too much. So you want to try all these new ways to make money, but you don't want to ever go all in. He talks about how there's companies that will only limit their new ventures to 5% of their total revenue because they don't want to go all in on something, then find out it doesn't work. I don't know if he compares this to Battleship, but that's totally what I was thinking of. He's just like, oh, fire a bunch of shots wherever you think it might be a good idea, and then if you hit something, like if it works, fire a cannonball and just like put a lot more effort into it. Basically, go all in only once you've proven that it's something that's going to work out for you. On the topic of the 20-mile march, that's completely what I am doing with these videos. I did not on the first day go all out and make this like huge fancy intro and everything, and just go crazy making one super good video only to get tired the next week and make a video that's much lower quality. I started out basically low quality and continue to make low quality videos just for the sake of consistency, and then maybe I could change 20% and get like a different intro. If you noticed at the beginning of this video, I started out just saying the title of the book, so that's a small change to what I'm doing, not something that's going to be hard to continue. That's just a shot. If I like it, I'll throw a cannonball, maybe make an intro. But basically, 20-mile march, just be consistent. Doesn't matter what you do, just be consistent at it, and then eventually you can slowly evolve, but don't change too much. Stick to your original plan. Now, along those same lines of innovation, he says that you should have basically a strict plan in place about how your business operates, what your main focus is going to be, what your business is going to do. You should have all these different points. He gives the example of Southwest Airlines, which was one of the good companies in this book, and he talks about how they said they would only fly 737s, and they would never go into the cargo business, only a couple lightweight packages that were very high margins. He would talk about how they would keep their turnaround time low. They wouldn't have first class seating or any upgrades. They wouldn't sell food on board, and they basically stuck with most of that. But he says that these companies tend to end up changing 20% of their plan versus the other companies that were compared and not so great would change their plans by more like 60% on average. So you want to have this set plan in place and then just be consistent about it. Another thing on consistency. He talks about how Apple was doing well. They're okay, and then they fire Steve Jobs, and then the new guy kind of like changes what their focus is, and then Steve Jobs comes back and saves the company, and they're like, oh, he's so innovative, but really he just kind of went back to the roots and only made small changes. When he came back and basically turned the whole company around, that was without releasing the iPod or anything. He was going back to just the Mac computers, the Macintosh, and that's how he turned the company around, and then he got into the new innovation. Talk about other similar companies and how they change their plans too much. They say like you'll have this one method, say you're going all in on lean, and then you'll change it and you're going all in on some other weird methodology and another one, and it's just like any one of those could work. The point is you just have to stick with it over the very long term. You can't change it every 10 years. You can change your plans a little bit to kind of keep with the times. You're going to need to change your plans by about 20% over the course of like 20 years, but you should not be changing your plans 60% or completely revolutionizing everything within like a 2-year span over and over. You could slowly change the entire company, but it'll take about 100 years because you're only going about 20% per 20 years.